Well, good afternoon for most, good morning for some. We're super excited for you to join us today for our webinar on the EU Pay Transparency Compliance Directive that's going to be coming into action this upcoming year in 2026. We're proudly joined by our partners at Sales Excellence Advisors. We hope to have a great session for you all. We're going to give folks a few more minutes to trickle in, but while we do that, want to again thank you for your time. Thank you for joining. Hopefully, you all received a thank you for attending the session and signing up for it, which is our complete guide on the topic. If you do have any questions after the session, please don't hesitate to reach out. You can contact us by reaching out to contact@revengconsulting.com. It'll be in these slides, and we'll get started here in a few minutes.
Quang, next time we should have some background music.
Okay, might be able to do that.
I think Goldcast does it. I'm not sure how to do it. I can't imagine it's all that difficult to do, but you're on mute.
Yeah, I was trying to see if I can get the music going.
Got it. Yeah. Well, there's a little. Okay, it's like elevator music, as they say. Very cool. Yeah, for those of you that are just joining, usually we wait until about 2 or 3 minutes after, give folks time to join. So appreciate the patience. We'll get kicked off shortly. It's okay.
Again, good afternoon to most, good morning to some. Thank you so much for joining our session today. We'll get started here in a minute, but before we do, just wanted to again thank you everyone for registering. Hopefully you received an email from us yesterday with our complete guide on the topic. We welcome follow-up questions, and we'll go through this in the session in a couple minutes, but we want to make sure that this is interactive. So feel free to drop your questions, your comments, your thoughts in the chat, and we will answer them as we go through this today's discussion. All right, let me take a quick look. Okay, I think we're right at 203, 803. So let's dive right in. So again, welcome to today's webinar on the topic of the EU Pay Transparency Directive that will be going into place in June of 2026. There's been a lot of talk about this topic, and what we want to do today is to share some of our thinking on it and really leave you with a pragmatic set of frameworks and tools. And also some real life case studies, right? Like what are clients wrestling? What are people dealing with it? What are the consequences of an inaction? And how do you really wrestle with this overarching directive and use it to your advantage? So without further ado, everyone, my name is Quang. I'm a partner at RevEng Consulting. We are a consulting firm that is really focused on bridging the gap between strategy and execution. We are joined, really proud to join by our partners at Sales Excellence Advisors, Rebecca and Matt. They also, similar to us, believe that the real benefit of change in consulting and whatnot is in when you can connect strategy and execution. They're based in their head offices in the UK, and they really bring a deep insight into the art of sales. And so their combination of being on the ground and our analytical prowess really allows us to bring, I think, a very unique and differentiated perspective to this topic. So, as I mentioned, we want today to be interactive. Please don't hesitate to use the chat function to, again, drop your questions, comments, thoughts. Carmen, myself will be speaking, but really what we want to do is to have this be an interactive conversation. And so Rebecca and Matt have pleasantly agreed to help facilitate that by helping us provide some context and making this much more of a conversation than a one-way talk. All right. Last thing I'll mention is just a couple of disclaimers. One, this webinar is meant to provide educational information, not legal or professional advice. EU member state requirements may vary, so please consult your qualified legal counsel in your respective jurisdiction. Implementation strategies must be adapted to your specific organizational context, and so please keep that in mind. And last, RevEng and Sales Excellence Advisor assumes no liability for decisions made based on this information. So without further ado, I will pass it on to Rebecca.
Hi, welcome to the webinar, everyone. So why don't we get started with a poll? Very exciting, interactive poll. So where are you on your compliance journey? If you just pop it into the conversation in the chat, we can just see your answers. You've got 1, haven't started yet, 2, unsure, 3, making progress, and 4. Okay, we've got the first one, sunflowers. A lot of 3s in here. Okay, cool. So I feel like we're probably between a 1 and a 3 for most people. So I suppose getting started, if an organization is hearing all this and thinking, where should we begin? What's the starting point? What's the first step from moving from awareness to action? Carmen, do you want to give a bit more of an overview on that?
Yeah, of course. And again, just to echo Quang and Rebecca, appreciate all of you joining us today. So Quang, if you can go to the next slide. The directive, it sounds like many of you are obviously greatly further along in the journey. So that's great. Like Rebecca said, a lot of 2s and 3s. I think what's important to recognize, and again, for those of you that are in this journey, none of this should necessarily be a surprise for you, but you'll see later in the webinar how we kind of connect it to the framework and thinking about pay transparency comprehensively across different dimensions within your organization. So the directive really outlines 5 obligations: pre-employment pay information. So again, providing pay ranges. And I think important call out here is we see this a lot with clients, both in the US, but also in Europe. And that is, the ranges tend to be either incorrect in the sense that, most organizations will go from a Q1 to a Q3, or it'll be artificially large. And so that range that you disclose could come back to factor into any pay assessments that you do. So it is important that the range that you disclose is the range in which you intend to hire someone in at. So just, again, I think the important thing here is this calibrates down to, it's a compensation issue, but it's also a talent acquisition issue. It's a legal issue as well. So that's the first obligation. The second is the worker information rights. And so what's interesting about the directive is it certainly lists a number of mandates and compulsory actions, but there are strongly recommended guidance in terms of the overall sort of cultural shift, right? Working to educate managers and leaders on compensation, how you can talk about it, intelligently, how you can talk about it in the context of the directive. But I think the biggest thing here with worker information rights, and this sort of goes back to the last point, the burden of proof, is that there's a pretty big window in which people have after they leave a job to make some sort of accusation or some sort of claim. The burden of proof is not on them; it's on the company, as we all know. So there is that aspect of it. And then the day-to-day, what we would call day-to-day worker information rights, is if somebody does have some sort of claim that's on information and belief, they can make that claim, and the employer has a pretty quick turnaround to respond to it. And so it is 2 months, and I'm sure all of us are thinking like 2 months is a long time. But for those of us who have worked in a large organization, 2 months can go by in a blink. So it's important that you have not only your philosophy around compensation, your structure, but the ability to report on it, right? The ability to go in and say, okay, how does this role compare to other roles in a similar level? Are there legitimate reasons that would justify a greater than 5% pay gap, et cetera, et cetera? And that really dovetails into the last one, which is the regular reporting. There frankly is a mandate on this in the directive, but I think the other side of it in terms of the reporting that's important to note is each state or each member state may be somewhat different, but these will be scrutinized, right? These will be made available at a public level in some circumstances. So I think I say that because if it really goes into the cost of getting it wrong. Like, reporting is sort of the bare minimum, but really we look at it like, what happens if you get this wrong? There's certainly financial and regulatory penalties, right? The burden, sorry, not the burden, but the cost of getting it wrong is quite significant. I believe it's up to 4% of yearly turnover. There's obviously the litigation, legal exposure, there's reputational risks. There could be issues with public procurement. The directive does outline some issues with public procurement if there are systemic pay gap issues. And then I think one thing that we often don't talk about is the talent branding side of it. The reputational risks extend both to your customers, your current customers, but also people that you frankly need to grow as an organization. If you want talented people, sure, paying them is part of how that works, but they also want to work for a place that pays people fairly and equitably. So those are really the directives and the cost of getting it wrong.
Yeah, I'm curious. Matt, I was just going to ask you, well, given your experience and what's happening, my eyes go to the cost of getting it wrong, right? I mean, that's a big thing. I'm just curious, do you have a case study or something live that you're dealing with that you could share with us?
Yeah, I think so. I was actually going to say something else, so apologies, but no, I think the core concept of getting it wrong is something we've been talking about across projects for many years. So even if you think about compensation and reward, we don't just consider that compensation and reward software is procured because of the fact it reduces errors and increases revenue. It's also because of the fact it protects reputational brand. Percentages of businesses are wiped out overnight if they get it wrong, because bad publicity is a negative effect. And especially in the new social world we're living in as well, it can happen without people realizing. But in some of the work we're doing across the European companies, people are reviewing this, and what they've realized is if you're a global organization with headquarters in the US, you're not hidden from this. So even I've been working with a client recently who has a large population inside of Germany. They also have a significant population in the US. And whilst they're addressing it for here in Europe, they're going to be taking it back into the corporate office as well, because the knock-on effect of this Pay Transparency Directive is that it's going to make an organization consider everything in totality. The concept of it just being for Europe is there in what we're seeing, but actually at a global boardroom level, they've got to be considering it as a wider level, because it's about making sure there's equality. So I think you'll see that knock-on effect. And the other thing that we're starting to see is that we've seen 2s and 3s here saying, oh, we're ready and we're prepared. But again, I think what people are learning is they're different levels. It's like an onion. Once you start peeling it, it gets more and more and more, and there's complexities that you wouldn't necessarily understand. And some of the historical nature of what we've put in place, we now have to take into account, because we're going to provide better visibility across multiple areas of our business.
Got it. Super insightful. Yeah, and I think what you're saying is true, because obviously the focus of this session is on what's happening in the EU, but pay transparency is coming up in the States as well, right? It's not it's happening state by state, so it's not as overarching as what's happening in Europe. But yeah, we do also see sort of the echo umbrella effect of how it will affect things. Awesome. All right.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that, Quang, even inside of the EU Pay, like the EU directive, originally it was like a one-fits-all blanket, but now we're starting to see countries that are delaying things and pivoting slightly for certain jurisdictions. So whilst it's got that overarching banner, it takes into account some of the individual natures of the jurisdictions as well. So I think that's something we have to take into account as we go through this.
Yeah, certainly. All right, back to you, Carmen, I think.
Yeah, no, I think we're good. I think we move to the next slide. So we wouldn't be good consultants if we didn't have success factors and if we didn't have frameworks. And really the success factors here, I think there's a couple worth noting. And, as Quang mentioned in the beginning, every organization is going to be different. Your organization might be, a bit larger, a bit more kind of product led or whatever it may be. So these are not necessarily by any sense MECE, but I think they probably would apply in almost all cases. And that's the executive sponsorship, workers' council engagement, the manager capability development, and the comp expertise. And I'll just quickly touch on each of them. On the comp side, myself, Quang, others, others at RevEng, we've led comp internally for large global organizations, and we've certainly consulted with, at this point, hundreds. And in our experience, one of the most important areas is the executive sponsorship. The CRO, the CEO, the CFO, whatever it may be, if there's a large comp initiative, and in this case, this is a very much a large comp initiative, they need to own it, right? Comp is incredibly important. In many cases, it's more than half of someone's pay. In the EU, depending on the country, it could be 50 to 40% of someone's pay. And this is a big initiative, and it requires some sort of a cultural paradigm shift. And so you're not going to get that through just some blanket mandate on paper. That people need to see that. They need to see the modeling of that. And so it's critical that you have, whether it's the CRO, the CEO, the CFO, ideally the entire C-suite, that embraces this as a strategic lever. And that cascades down to, the different departments that are involved with making sure that you're compliant with the directive. The other is workers' council engagement. I've personally worked with global companies where we've had workers' councils with co-determination rights. I'm sure those of you on the call know those countries in Europe. And the relationships have been acrimonious. And even trying to make changes that are demonstrably positive are met with resistance. And it's a shame, because it's not because the folks on the workers' council are resistant to any sort of change. They are rightfully so a bit distrusting. And that acrimony has bred over the years. And now when you want to do something that course corrects or is the right thing to do, it's met with a bit of mistrust. And workers' council engagement, that relationship needs to be collaborative. It needs to be open, honest, transparent, and collaborative. The other is the manager capability development. Again, working in organizations, leading more trainings than I can count, I'm always surprised how managers, and I'm not talking first-line managers, second level and VP and above, they frankly don't understand how to speak about compensation. They don't understand how bands, right, external OTE or OTC bands are set. They don't understand the strategy behind that. They don't understand the leveling. They don't understand how compensation models work in the variable sense. That is going to have to change. Managers will need to be able to speak intelligently and competently on compensation, not just say, your comp is this. They'll need to be able to contextualize it. They'll need to be able to answer questions that are nuanced, and they will need to be accountable for it. And that accountability will extend to the organizational level. The last, it's a separate factor, but in many ways it's overarching, is the variable compensation expertise. In the European Union and Europe in general, variable compensation has been used a bit differently than it has in, say, the United States or Australia or other places around the world. It's certainly a component. Many companies have this, but in our experience working with many global organizations headquartered in, say, Germany or in Netherlands or in UK or Ireland, a lot of times that variable compensation takes on a bit more of an egalitarian approach than in, say, the United States, where it's a bit more differentiated. But regardless of your sort of approach to it, one thing that will need to be buttoned up is when you have roles where you need hunters and people to go out and acquire new logos or expand into an existing, territory book of business, you want people that are motivated by the financial incentive to perform. And so if you do have a wide pay mix, say of 60-40, well, all of a sudden you can find yourself with a cohort of people, hundreds of people, even thousands of people that have very wide disparity in their overall comp, in the actual comp. Now, some of that is certainly legitimate, right? You can point to it in the act, or the directive provides for that. You can say, well, there is this sort of skill, this expertise, this whatever it may be. However, as we all know, any good comp practitioner knows, oftentimes the underlying issue with compensation is not the benchmarking, it's not the pay mix, it's not the OTE, it's the quota setting. So if someone could make a claim that, hey, these territories are not even remotely optimized by potential, I'm unfairly being penalized, right? My comp is lower because the territory in which I was given, which I have no control over, has significantly less opportunity than somebody else in the same role with the same skill set. Now, that has not been arbitrated, that has not been litigated. The case law on that is yet to come, but it will come. And so rather than responding to it, let's get it right. And so we'll talk a little bit more about the comp, but as you can see, there's a pretty big bucket of knowledge that's required there, not just in terms of getting comp right for comp's sake, but in also making sure that we're balancing our requirements under the directive. You want to certainly be compliant, but you also want to make sure that the comp drives the business behaviors, aligns to your strategy as well. So there is that balancing point that companies will frankly have to figure out.
So Carmen, I noticed on the slide it says compliance is the floor, not the ceiling. What does that mean exactly?
Yes. I got so caught up in my soliloquy, I forgot to get to that part of the slide. Yeah, I think it's something that we think about oftentimes, and we see this in, other areas of compliance as well. I think it's important to recognize that there is a societal and generational shift in how individuals think about their compensation. And the act is a direct reflection of those two shifts. So yes, compliance is required, it's compulsory. There's really not much you can do about that as a business. But like most things, right, you have a choice in how you react. You don't necessarily have a choice in the stimuli, but you have a choice in how you react. You can either approach the directive as something that is an impediment, is a hurdle, is something that we just need to do. It's a cost of doing business, as they say, or you can approach it for what it is, something that is a strategic lever. It could position you reputationally much higher than your competitors. It can make you a model, right, for what corporate, the corporate entity could be, treating people fairly and equitably. And so when we say it's a floor, not a ceiling, really what we advocate for clients is don't think about it as a check the box compliance exercise simply because you have to comply with the directive. Think about how you can take this and use it as an opportunity, a strategic lever to differentiate yourself from an employer perspective, a talent branding perspective, and a competitive perspective. And frankly, the companies that do that, the research is unequivocal. The companies that pay well, that treat their employees well, they will outpace any index relative to those that don't. And the companies that do treat this as an opportunity, as a strategic lever, very likely will succeed versus those who don't.
I think that's a great way to think about it because it's not just the obligation, it's also the capability. And something I'm hearing a lot of is that organizations, they know what the directive requires, but they don't know where they stand. So how do you know where you are? How do you baseline yourself? How do you grade a readiness?
Yep. Yeah, and I think if you can go to the next slide. So this is our framework, RevEng's framework, and we've, again, like all good consultants, we have frameworks, but frameworks are important because they allow you to take a very messy, very chaotic world and organize it in a way that you can understand what's working well, what's not working so well, and where do I need to prioritize my time, right? The overarching constraint organizationally is limited resources in terms of time, in terms of people, in terms of technology. And so without a foundation of where to start, there is no basis of prioritization, right? So there is no optimization of those limited resources. Where we look at it is across 4 pillars. So strategic foundation, organizational readiness, Not sure why that's not capitalized, but here we are. Operational infrastructure. And then, of course, as we talked about, the comp side. So the framework is incredibly comprehensive because the act is in itself comprehensive, and it's critically important. We look at it across 144 different areas, but at a higher level, there's really 24, 25, right? So on the strategic foundation, how ready are you for this, right? Just how many of you, I would be curious, this is not a formal poll, but if you can just do this as a thought exercise and indulge me, how many of you have been part of a global or regional initiative, a reorg that has taken months and months and months of planning and design, of development, and then you roll it out and it's doesn't go the way you want it to? And oftentimes that's because when you work in these initiatives, you don't have that sort of, how ready are we for this change? Right? It's coming, but how ready are we for it? Do we have our change champions? Culturally, are we there yet? So that's kind of one of the many things that we think about strategic foundation. Of course, there's also the kind of financial planning side of it, the management side of it, organizational side. It's just that, right? How ready is the organization for this directive, right? So the right to information operating model, it's a completely different paradigm. I mean, working in comp myself and doing so in global roles, I can tell you that, and these are, at not small companies, Microsoft and SAP, if somebody were to ask me for an assessment of my comp relative to all of the peers in that same band based on the work, not the job code, I mean, we would have to bring in outside counsel. Like, that's not something we'd be able to do. And again, these are global companies, right? Big companies. So you really need to figure out, like, what do you need to put into place from a data architecture perspective, from a RevOps perspective, a reporting perspective. All of that needs to be in place. And this is, Quang, I see you went to pillar number 2, and I'll kind of just, one last thing I want to say on this is, so each of the pillars has these 6 buckets. And then each bucket has a number of things that, we look at. But I think one of the biggest areas here is going to be, the governance framework and decision rights. I put in the chat, I mean, just off the top of my head, we have legal, finance, HR, talent acquisition, comp finance, systems, RevOps, comp design, strategy, comms enablement. I'm sure I'm missing a couple others. That is a lot of cross-functional teams. That's a lot. Who does what? Who responds to what? Who has decision-making rights? Who's an accountable party? Who's a recommender party? Like, governance is going to be something that is critically important. And even in organizations today, the governance around just variable compensation is unclear and muddied. So to me, if you were to say, hey, I don't really have time to look at 144 different things, great. No one does. That's why they hire consultants. Not a shameless plug, but reality. I would say to focus on any one of these in the organizational readiness would be on 1 and 2, right? Make sure that you have your governance framework, decision rights, and your baseline in order. And then, Quang, if you can just go back quickly to the framework slide, one behind it. The last thing I'll say is I think I won't go too much on compensation. I already kind of talked about that, and we'll have a few slides that go into it. The one call I will say on the operational infrastructure that is important to note is we forget the data model and architecture that needs to drive that. I think one thing that we're seeing, this is both in the EU with EU clients, and we see it in the States as well. The move to consumption-based compensation is accelerating. This is something we talked about. I remember being at LinkedIn 7-8 years ago, 10 years ago, whatever it was, talking about how do we do consumption-based compensation. And LinkedIn, for those of you know, has a media business, and that's an at-risk revenue model. That is now creeping into SaaS. It's creeping into the traditional revenue models where you sign an IO, you recognize the revenue under IFRS, or if you're in the US under GAAP, don't even think about it. And so the operational infrastructure is changing, right? It's changing. So you need CRMs, customer data platforms, the Anaplans of the world, exactly, Verisend, Acheron, like whatever ICMs you're working at, probably a smattering of other plugins, right, to make sure that you're measuring these things correctly. And so that is, without a doubt, every single compensation engagement I ever done, there is always some fundamental breakage in the operational and the data and systems infrastructure. And so I would say that is probably the area that is going to be one of the more critical ones for people. I think most people, yeah, we know our strategic foundation, we got our governance model, we can fine tune it, we hear you, but to fix a systems ecosystem is not something that you can just throw in ChatGPT and say, what am I missing from this process artifact? Like, it's hands-on keyboard work. And so, Matt, I'm curious. Matt, you look like you're going to say something. I can see it. I can see the eagerness. So, I mean, this is largely your space. I'm curious what your thoughts are here.
No, I'm seeing that. When you said you can't use ChatGPT to write governance documents, it's 100% true. Like, as much as we're using ChatGPT and other AI technologies out there, it's just not possible. And I think what we're seeing through the use of the different technologies and services that are being offered, like you mentioned years ago, pilots were something that every technology vendor hated. But now, because of the fact we want to try before we buy, that consumption-based model is just becoming more and more critical. But in amongst it all, technology is still going to fail if you don't understand what you're actually trying to achieve as a success criteria, and then how you get to that endpoint. So yeah, when you said that the AI world was changing things, 100% right in that term.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's one of those things that, again, for those of you that are in an organization, a seemingly simple ask involves more engineering hours and business cases than you would ever think. So it is something that, of course, it will continue to evolve. But I think the point is, make sure that you have an understanding of all the systems and all the tools in play, because of the reporting requirements and because of the right to information in 2 months, what I would argue is effectively real time for corporate entity. All right, enough of frameworks. I think we all have this down. Quang, if you can go to not the next slide, but I think the slide after that. Matt, I think this is something I can speak about for a long time, but Matt, you're a bit more pithy than I am, so I'm gonna maybe kick it to you to walk through that.
I think this one I'm quite passionate about, because everybody's speaking about the directive in a sense of, oh, it's changing the way in which we're doing things, which is true. We're providing more equality and transparency through the way that we pay grade and the way in which we give information. But at the core, what organizations are still doing is they're still trying to achieve the same goals. So when you think about, we use the term, or Americans use the term RevOps more commonly than us folk in Europe. And we're starting to get that as part of our group function. And what their objectives are is that they're looking to leverage the same KPIs that drive our business. So revenue growth, CAC ratio, the ability to forecast accurately, because of the fact that those things are still what pay our bills and still what we are going to work for. But what that's doing is being bucketed into different areas of our business. And now those areas of our business are effectively having to provide transparency as to how they're providing clarity to different employees in that section. So inside of the tech world, we're talking about things like customer success organizations that are looking at retention and expansion. Whereas before, we'd be using terms like account manager, customer success individual, retention team. That then also filters into what we're doing across the risk management of our business, because even though we are leveraging cross-functional teams, the ability to provide transparency as to how you're being compared against your peer, how you're getting salaried against somebody else in a comparable field, is meaning that we're having to look at all the organizational roles and really categorize what they're doing. And that is not just useful for the directive, but also useful for us as businesses, because it means we can actually take stock of what we've got. And as we look at the services that we're providing to our customers, we have the ability to look at the improvement cycles so that we can test these things before we implement them correctly and analyze them, which then allows us to measure effectively, but measure in a way that's equal. So you mentioned the workers' councils. I remember inside of Germany, we actually failed in getting a technology live because the workers' councils refused to sign it off, even though we provided a greater level of visibility to their population. And we highlighted the fact that the change wasn't going to have a negative impact. So I think all of these things are linking to that. And the RevOps Command Center is making sure that not just the directive is implemented, but we're still able to run day to day with what we're trying to achieve. got me on my bandwagon now. So
yeah, and I would also add too. I think an important call out here is having a really solid RevOps function or go-to-market function. I know RevOps and go-to-market are used somewhat interchangeably, and they are in some ways. Obviously, that confers benefits outside of just compliance with the pay directive, right? It works. We do a lot of work with RevOps and go-to-market ops, and I can tell you that if you think about the 4 levers that you pull as an organization to make more revenue, you have opportunities in your pipeline, you have your win rate, you have your speed to close, and you have your average deal size. All of those are directly linked to a well kind of planned, thought out, executed RevOps center, particularly like speed to close. I can't tell you how many times I've looked at performance data and it takes 60 days to close something. Why? Well, legal has a 12-day SLA. Deal desk has a 6-day SLA. And it's like, well, the data shows that for every day past the median, right, it reduces your chance of closing by X%. So I think it's an important call. Like RevOps is absolutely imperative and critical for compliance, but there's obviously a whole heck of a lot of other benefits from being buttoned up on the RevOps side. Cool. Real quickly, Quang, if you can go to the next slide. Revenue planning excellence framework. Some of you may be wondering how this fits in the context of EU Pay Transparency. It does. A couple things. So when we talk about this, by the way, this is just a best practice, irrespective of the act, right? This is how revenue planning should work. There's sort of 6 buckets. What is the market assessment? Fairly straightforward. That's usually FP&A is kind of giving you that. When we say market assessment in a corporate level, it's, hey, this is what our goal is for next year in EMEA, in APAC, in APJ, in China, in LATAM, and NAMER, whatever it may be. Okay, then you have to design the territories. This is where it ties back to the directive. How does one design a territory? I mean, I've been involved in this process, the corporate side and the consulting side, and I can tell you it's very hard to do. Even when you have great data models, even when you have a ton of smart people on the data science side, it's just very hard to do. But unfortunately, we need to sort of figure out how to do it better, because again, what we don't want to have happen, and again, I'm sure for those of you that have been in the comp side or have been, in other areas of like a go-to-market function, the Salesforce function, there are certain times where folks do really well because the territory is just conducive to them doing very well. There's territories I've seen people have territories across, say, Western Europe, and one person has Berlin. And it's the same opportunity, but guess what? The person who has all of Western Europe is traveling, quite a bit more. And we see that in the States too. So the territory design and optimization. So it's understanding the market size. Now we design the territories. This can be problematic because when we get into the quota setting side, some companies, super simple, right? I'm not trying to trivialize it, but simple in the sense of, hey, we know we have a number of contracts. We know we have, ARR, projected out 2 years, 3 years because they're locked in the multi-year deals. Much easier to predict that quota setting. But when you have at-risk revenue models, like media is a very good example, it's almost impossible to predict, right? Google is seeing this now. Google has historically had 94% of the global search market, and they're dramatically losing share to the ChatGPTs, the Claudes, the Perplexities of the world, or they're starting to on zero-based search, but they now will when they launch ads in the next couple months here. So it is important that quota setting is reflective of the opportunity in the territory. And so we no longer can just do a massive overassign to protect top line revenue, because that will trickle down to the individual performance level and could potentially get you in trouble in terms of the pay gap. And you might be saying, well, the fine that we might pay may be justified, and that might be true. I know some organizations do conceptualize and think about it that way, but again, it goes back to those risks. It's not just a financial risk. There's other risk involved. There's, of course, reputational, talent branding risk, and the like. Then the last 3, capacity and headcount. This one's really important. If you know your territory, how many you have, or how many books you have in a particular account in your segmentation, and you know your quota, well, then it's how many people do you need, right? If you have too many people, then you have quotas that, are fairly indistinguishable. If you have too few people, then you have people that, own a big territory, potentially are able to not even come close to hitting quota. We see that in many, many clients, both in EU and the US. So capacity planning at the activity level, literally, if I'm an SMB or mid-market or a strategic or an enterprise or a global, whatever your segmentation is, literally mapping out all of the core activities they do, ideally against your sales process, and saying, okay, this is how much time it takes to service one account or to convert one lead that comes in inbound or outbound, whatever it may be. This is how much time it's going to take. So therefore they can manage this many accounts, right? So just being very prescriptive about headcount planning. And then again, the comp alignment. This one, as many of us are comp professionals here, this one is important because again, they have to reflect the territory reality. You have to make sure that whatever distinction you have in performance is based on legitimate, genuine factors and not simply based on the luck of someone being in a particular territory or getting a particular book of business. And then the last piece is the governance side, which we talk a lot about governance. It's important, especially in large organization. This is a different governance model. This is really more in the RevOps, kind of go-to-market ops or sales ops governance model. And unlike the last slide where the O was not capitalized, this appears as a mistake. It is not. Continuous feedback loops. We did this intentionally because I think we're trying to impart how much we believe the continuous feedback loops are important integration points with this very cross-functional process.
Yeah, I'm actually glad that's there because really you're only ever going to learn from any project with a continuous feedback loop, and it helps you adapt. It helps you grow quickly through any progress, any project. So I think it's important that it's there actually. And then I guess we're on to another poll. Yay. So after reviewing the last slide, based on where you are in your journey, which of these are the most critical? Just add your vote again to the chat and we can see what everyone comes up with. Marcus gave a 2. Yes, Matt, we know. Okay, we're actually quite high for most of these. Couple of 2s, couple of 4s. Yeah.
The territory design is really hard because even getting that right is difficult, but then you also have to get the quota setting right. Yeah, and in the EU too, we work with a lot of clients that have these sort of what we would call hybrid models. You have, and it's not quite as common in the States, but you have like a field salesperson, right? AE or field rep, whatever it may be. But then you have a large partner distributor, type of network. And the compensation there is really difficult because certain countries, like we see this notably in Italy and Spain, they rely, like if you want to enter those countries, you're basically, you have to work with sort of an on the ground partner. It's very difficult to penetrate, Spain and Italy without it. And so the compensation is very different. And it's different because the territory design is different, right? So if you have the same role operating in Italy, Spain, Germany, Netherlands, wherever, it may be, which again, many of our clients do, the pay is dramatically different. And same role, because the sales process, the rules of engagement, the number of people that are brought into that sale are different and unique. And so that could be very clearly a distinction that is justifiable. But again, right, we will see how this plays out with sort of arbitration and litigation and all of that stuff that will come inevitably over the next few years. I think that the important point here is if you know that something could potentially be a challenge, an issue, a blocker, make sure that you address it, understand it, analyze it, and you may decide that we don't need to do anything about it. It's something that's there. We don't view it as a risk. Great, you move on. But it's better to make that determination than to skip it over entirely.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, Quang, I noticed too that nobody chose quota setting. I guess if you do the territory design well, the quota setting is sort of a easy extension.
In theory.
Yeah, in theory, I will say there's and maybe in the spirit of the holiday season, we do have a quota setting guide that we put together, and it does walk through how to set quotas and references the framework we just saw, but it really actually talks more about the talent and the financial implications of getting quota setting wrong. So irrespective of the act, we work with clients where the quota setting is either bimodal, or it's, it doesn't necessarily follow sort of a normal distribution you'd expect. And we see a lot of regrettable turnover, right? People leave, right? You can attract people, you have great OTE, but no one can hit their quota, so they leave.
Yeah.
Okay. So anyway, we can send that out after, but yeah. All right, let's do the next slide.
Yeah, and I think one thing, as I look at this, one thing that isn't called out but is implied is the back end technology, right? And even if we just focus on Matt's favorite topic, compensation, right? The systems and how everything ties together, both from a compliance perspective, but also to ensure that everything we just talked about on the previous slide ticks and ties. I love Matt's perspective on this page.
Yeah, I think that the compensation system framework is something that's critical to everybody, because typically we look at technology and we go, okay, right, technology is going to fix the world, but it's not. There's that same old adages of rubbish in and rubbish out. I'm being nice with it because it's early in the US. I think the reality is that a compensation framework is only as good as how the organization has set it up. So the inputs need to be there. If you're going to try and track performance, you need to make sure that the data is there to support it, which sometimes is a fundamental that people forget. The validation in the engine, so the calc logic, calculation's a calculation at the end of the day, no matter if it's a long-term incentive, bonus, non-salesperson commission or bonus versus a salesperson, procuration fee. All of those are just calculated logics against a transaction, which lead to an output. And the thing that I find quite interesting about all of the tools that are in industry today is that effectively you're looking to provide better transparency across an organization, but people always sit there and go, well, why does that really matter? And ultimately, it's because you're driving the behavior of the organization. If they don't trust the framework, if they don't understand the plan, if they don't understand what they're actually trying to achieve, there's no alignment from the comp plan to the company performance. And therefore, the framework is completely void. And just spending all that money for no real reason, which means that all of the additional work you're doing with answering questions about challenges just is an overarching cost of the business that they're never going to see back. So I think understanding that the framework sits with you as an organization and that it's down to technology not changing the world, there's things to fix before that, is really, really important.
Yeah. And Matt, I'm curious because in all the, at least not all, many of the conversations I have had with folks on the topic of EU Pay Transparency, often the first thing or the primary thing that people are asking about is, well, what system can I put in place to get me the numbers I can report on this, right? It feels like that's the gut reaction or the gut response to compliance. And as we've known and what we've shared today, it's much more of that. Like, so why that response? I'm just curious.
I think it's because it's the thing everybody wants to jump to, which is the output. Tell me the answer.
Yeah.
But you can't answer a question if you don't know what the question is. And I think that's part of it. We've been part of some events over the last few months in Europe, and the common theme is everybody's talking about the directive and being prepared for it. They're talking about it in the sense of getting new job descriptions. They're talking about it in benchmarking of employees against male and female in certain countries. And then when the question's asked about the compensation part, less than 2% of people were saying that they're prepared for it. And so if you think about that means 98% of people are really not sure where this aligns to it. And so the question that we're getting is how is the system going to give me the answer? Yeah. No, because you haven't asked the question yet. And that's a really interesting dynamic.
Yeah. Wow. No, 2%. That's kind of scary. All right, Carmen, back to you to round us out here.
Yeah, and I'll try to be quick because I want to leave some time for Q&A. The the framework that you just saw is actually a framework within a framework. I think it's, for us, I mean, our focus at RevEng is to strategy and execution, and unequivocally, I can tell you that good execution comes from knowing the details. They're not fun. They're not always fun. They're not always sexy, but good execution always follows being thorough, knowing exactly what's wrong, what the root causes are, and not just necessarily artificially, like Matt, to your point, just diving in, right? You can dive in trying to solve something, but is it really the right thing to solve? Is it really where your attention should be focused, your time? And again, the constraint here is limited resources, right? So how do we manage the biggest impact, right, for the resources that we have? Well, prioritizing those levers is a good start. You can't do that unless you are, thorough in the assessment. So on that, the sales comp growth model, this is of course within the compensation pillar. However, this framework in and of itself is also meant to be organizational wide. So there's 4 layers, as you can see. Guiding principles. These are things that transcend the entirety of the go-to-market function or the Salesforce function. We talked about a lot of them. Simple and scalable is one that we haven't. Unfortunately, things aren't always simple, or they're not always scalable. But I think having that as a guiding principle to say, hey, how can we create something that is scalable, that does comply or whatever, but not overdo things, right? And so that leads us into the corporate side. We need to know what your segmentation is. We talked about headcount. Number of folks in the poll talked about, headcount planning being a priority, or an area that was difficult. Well, headcount is going to change on your segmentation. An AE representing an SMB book might have 250 accounts, but an enterprise book might have 2. Right. And that seems simple, right? Those are extremes, but there's a whole lot in the middle. And I can tell you in my experience, every single time what happens is the line at the top gets higher and the line at the bottom gets lower. And nobody recognizes that the middle is so large that you end up needing 4 or 5 different segmentation within the middle. And that changes your headcount. That changes what they do. The sales process is different. Those sales velocity levers are different. Talent strategy, of course, we talked about. Regulatory and compliance really was the heart of this call. The operational elements, sales process, org design, comp policy, admin, quota setting, systems, tools, all things that we've talked about, right? They're within the purview of compensation, but you can see how they transcend that topic and actually can work across the compliance directive. And then the lastly is the comp plan itself. How do you build an effective comp plan? Any one of us could probably build a comp plan. I know I can in very short order. I can tell you with a Radford IC2 in Germany gets paid right now in media, off the top of my head, in the UK. But if you don't have a comp plan that's supported by all those other things, the greatest comp plan in the world, the most competitive, if your territory design and your quota setting is off, doesn't matter. People are going to leave, even though you say it's the greatest comp plan. So I'll leave with this, and I think we'll have about 5 or 6 minutes. The last slide, Quang, if you can just go to it really quickly. The slide is, to me, when I first saw a variation of, there's many variations of the slide. I'm sure you've all seen them as well. But when I first saw it, I'm like, I don't know what this is kind of pointless. It doesn't tell me anything. But as I become more senior and, worked with more clients and seen more things, I realized that this is probably the single most powerful slide that anyone could look at, because it really does set the tone for your comp philosophy and your culture. In the US, we have a lot of companies follow, a seller leave mentality. And what that essentially means, if you look at the x-axis, if you're a low performer, let's say that's the bottom 20th percentile or the bottom quartile, well, your actual pay is going to be close to the 25th percentile of the market. But if you're a high performer, right, you're in the 70th, 80th percentile, whatever you define that as, your pay is going to be closer to the 75th or 80th or 90th percentile of the actual market. So there's a big, big, big bridge there by design. But if you think about what that does, we're all working within a budget. So in that budget, what you can do is you can have high OTE and very high accelerator rates, because you're not paying anybody that's below the 50th percentile in attainment anything, or even the 60th. You're literally following a Paretian distribution saying, I want my top 20% of people to make 80% of the money. And that's okay. But that changes the culture. It changes the way you think about hiring decisions, talent decisions. It changes the nucleus of how you set quotas. It changes everything. Versus a lot of companies follow a market tracker where there's distinction, but it's not quite as the order of magnitude is less. And then finally, there's a pleasant place to work where there's really not much distinction. A low performer gets paid a little bit less than a high performer. It's very collegial or egalitarian, and that's fine too. Every company has a different culture. But in the context of pay transparency, this matters, because while you have to be compliant with the directive, you also have to think about the human element to sales compensation, which is how do you motivate people to sell something when they want to make a lot of money, but you have to be able to justify differences greater than 5% in pay. And so everything that we talked about allows you to do that. So that's, I think I can end it there and give the remainder of the time for any Q&A.
Yeah, thanks, Homer. Yeah, and I think what you said brings it back, just to kind of reiterate, everything we talked about, whether it's territory design, quota setting, if you have a sales team, you have a philosophy, whether it's by design or just by what's actually happening from these different decisions you're making. And so with the directive, you need to be able to defend that philosophy. And I think that's, again, that's a great way to think about it, right? And so if you think each line, whether you're on the green line, red line, orange line, purple line, each part of that line represents an individual. And whether based on their all those factors, their gender, et cetera, you need to be able to explain what's actually happening and why. So yeah, really good summary page. So with that, we want to leave just a couple minutes for Q&A. Feel free to drop them in the chat. We'll answer them. And again, as a reminder, first off, again, thank you for the time, for joining, for the engagement. We always appreciate that. If you have other questions, you can always reach out to contact@revengconsulting.com. And we're happy to answer those questions. We'll also be following up with a link to today's materials. So you have this, you'll have all the slides, and you'll have also our session recording as well. So with that, I'll see if there's any questions. And anyone can ask questions.
I think one question that always comes to mind for people as well is what actually happens if we're not compliant, if we don't do it to the letter, to the T, then what is actually going to happen?
Yeah, I guess Carmen or Matt, I'll defer to you for that question.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of, I mean, the directive sets out specific, penalties. I believe it's very similar to GDPR. I think it's 4% of global turnover or revenue. And I imagine, like GDPR, there is sort of a progressive element to it. But frankly, I guess the real answer is we don't know. I mean, it hasn't gone into effect yet. Given that this has been a topic, I mean, in my time in corporate America, and then of course as a consultant working with the EU side of things, this has been a topic that entire time in the EU. And there's been various evolutions of it. So I imagine that they are not going to be lax on enforcement and penalties, but it hasn't been enacted yet. So time will tell.
Yeah, I think to your point, Carmen, I think 4% is what's written in the document, but I think it will be the negative publicity to whoever gets caught first, and then there'll probably be a ripple effect. Because if you think, there was a statistic that was once given by American Express that 1% of their shares, 1% of their stock price was worth X amount of revenue. So if you consider it that way, that's going to be a significant penalty to anyone that gets their knuckles wrapped first. And then you'd imagine that once it happens once, and once they understand what they're doing, they are going to get everything together. So you'll start to see this knock-on domino effect of everybody looking at the minutiae, not just the big parts, but the little bits of detail, because they want to make sure that they're really getting to the point of what the objective is, which is equality and transparency.
Yeah. And then the flip side of that, I imagine, is true as well, right? The positive publicity of being someone that can say, hey, we pay our people fairly. We can report. And so, yeah, I think and I try to look at the bright side of things whenever I can. So yeah, I think that two-way street.
Imagine
Awesome.
applying for a job where you actually know what you're going to get paid before you go. Hey.
Yeah. Imagine that. Awesome. Well, again, thank you everyone. And we really appreciate all your time today. Cheers.
Cheers.